The following podcast is part of the Underdog Sports Podcast Network. For advertising information or to find more great podcasts, visit us at www.theunderdogsports.com and follow us on Twitter at RealTheUnderdog.
You're listening to the Underdog Sports NBA Show with hosts Tyler Laurie and Zandrick Ellison. Brought to you by Underdog Sports. Tune in every week as Tyler and Zan recap the biggest storylines and news in the NBA.
Welcome, everyone, to the Underdog NBA Show. I'm your co-host, Zandrick Ellison. My normal co-host, Tyler Laurie, is out. Contract negotiations, demanding extensions, being difficult as always. So who better to replace him since everyone's talking about college basketball, college kids, our own college wonderkin, our own potential NBA draft pick in the front office, Tal Bulgair. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
You're still in school, right? You did not declare.
Yeah, right now I'm a sophomore. Might take the year off to train for the draft next year.
I know there was a lot of chatter. Would you declare? Would you wait? I bet the NBA is probably hiring like kids out of analytic programs right now. There's such like a need for it, and I think they're finally realizing it. Is it like a hot thing, like to be interested in NBA, like machine learning and stuff like that at school, or is it still kind of cutting edge?
I don't know. At least among my friends and stuff. And then, people are interested in it in the same sense that people fantasy basketball or fantasy football or stuff, but not at a more serious level of I actually want to work with a team type thing.
Is that still your intention? Would you still love to be like the next Daryl Morey, or do you want to use like your sort of, statistician skills in a different format?
I don't know. I think I'm slightly less into it now than I was last year, and especially than I was less than I was before entering college, because at this point I just feel like, at least in terms of what you can do with public data, then because I've already done a lot of projects and I'm not super interested in doing here's another MVP prediction type poster, this type of thing.
You want to break that down. But maybe if you had access to the tracking and stuff like that, you could come up with something even more spectacular.
Yeah.
Or you lose interest. I mean, people always say there's a prime, I think, for NBA fans, and it's usually, when you're, it sounds counterintuitive, you get into it when you're 10, 12, and you start watching. And then you become really into it when you're 15 and 16 and you really don't have much else going on,
Yeah.
And then now you're in college, you're meeting people, you're having fun. Maybe you have less time to watch, a Hornets game or whatever.
Yeah. I'd say I'm still as interested in basketball and the NBA as a whole as I was before, but just in general, my interest in I actually want to make a career out of basketball analytics is essentially not really there anymore.
Well, you know what we could do? We could pivot a little bit. You make billions of dollars in some other data mining world, and then you buy a team, and then you can take over that way.
Yeah, and then I can pay the luxury tax for Evan Fournier every year.
Yeah, well, we should talk about that. So you're more of an NBA guy. We're not going to talk about college, although congrats to Baylor. You're a big Boston fan, and I think they need the help, if they're not going to hire you full time. I want to talk about a couple teams that looked like they had a bright future, Tal style, Boston and Golden State. And right now, as we record, Boston is 25-25. And then in the second half of the show, we'll talk about Golden State, who's 23-27, despite, Curry being healthy for most of the year. So let's talk about Boston first. It doesn't sound like you're a huge fan of the Evan Fournier fix. Do you think they needed to do something more?
No, I'm a decent fan of it. It was more of a joke type thing. I think people had really high expectations of what are they going to do with the trade exception and all this, and that as far as possible uses of it go, then I think it's pretty good, because it's funny saying this when in previous years people were they have so many wings and nothing else, but this year they really needed the help of having another wing who can score and shoot, who isn't Tatum and Brown.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because, the rap on, you said Boston was wing, too many wings and that they had so much depth. And now it feels like they don't have either, even though they've, drafted Romeo Langford, they drafted Naismith or brought him in. Yeah. Those guys haven't been able to contribute yet. And I think do you think the team was like relying on them being a little further along?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think anyone expected that Langford would essentially like still be a rookie in terms of not having any healthy offseason yet and not having any extended play time. But I don't know, did you have high expectations for the bench and the rotation in general before the year started? Because if you're looking at it, it's mostly rookies and inexperienced guys outside of the starting lineup.
Yeah, it was sort of. I think I wrote a post about them early in the off season about it's sort of the search at the time for a sixth or seventh a reliable guy. Can it be Grant Williams? Is it going to be Robert Williams? And then you lose one with Tice trading him away. Both Tyler and I were a little surprised by that. I know that he'd be a free agent, but did you think is it more just handing the baton to Robert Williams, or is there reason why they didn't think Tice was part of their future?
Yeah, I think it's mostly handing the baton. It's also, I'm pretty sure this was a couple of days before Tice was traded when they were playing the Rockets, I think it was. And Tice either didn't play at all or he only played 5 minutes or something. And then Brad Stevens, after the game, was realistically, in most games, we're only going to play 2 out of the 3 bigs, which were at the time Williams, Thompson, and Tice. So, either way, there wasn't really a need for all 3 of them, right?
But can you convince me, as a Boston guy, you watch a lot more Boston than I would, if that's the argument, limited bigs, I understand that. Why Thompson over Tice? I mean, I know he's a better rebounder. Is he offering much else?
I don't know. I think Tice is much better too, but maybe the deal wasn't on the table for Thompson.
Right. Yeah. I mean, no one's looking for Thompson. And I think that maybe that's the point. I think Tice maybe is going to get a decent salary in the offseason. And if your plan in the future is Robert Williams, maybe you don't think it's worth having him around. It's always just weird to me when, playoff teams start planning for the offseason now. I feel like,
right.
I mean, I don't know. You're 25 and 25. Maybe it feels far away, but you're also the team that beat Philly last year. I mean, are they really that much different of 2 teams this year? I don't get it. I mean, but do you feel like they're just planning for the future, or do you think they're gearing up toward a sort of the Brendan Fournier, obviously, to maybe try to make a series of the first round?
I mean, even the Fournier move, I think you could look at it as some type of gearing for the future, because realistically, they weren't gonna they're not gonna have cap space this year, and then next year Tatum will get his max extension. So they're not gonna have cap space in the near future. So then trading for a guy who you have his bird rights, then they can re-sign him, and that's essentially their way of preparing for the future. Of that's the main way.
So you think keeping him because he's only 28. I mean, he's been around for a while, but he's still a pretty good player.
Yeah, I think they traded him with the intention of re-signing him this offseason, even if it seems I don't know, you wouldn't think that you would think that $20 million a year for him is an overpay, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, but I also feel like he got a little lost in Orlando just because it's no one pays attention to Orlando, and he actually had a pretty good year last year. He shot the ball well all year long. It's just no one cared.
Right.
So I think he's fine. I understand that move, less so the Tice. So you have wings. I mean, but overall, how do you diagnose the problem? If you were Dr. House and this patient showed up, it's we were last year 48 and 24, and we've already lost more games than that this year. Our defense has fallen from 4th to 18th. Why is Boston so much worse this year?
I mean, the really cop-out explanation, which I'm not as big of a fan of, is they've had a lot of players missing games, or I saw something today that they've had more players miss games due to health and safety protocols than the bottom 10 teams combined. But to some extent, I think that's a lame excuse, because a lot of those games is Romeo Langford and Tristan Thompson missing games. It's other teams have injuries too.
Yeah, I saw that post that posted, but like Tatum's played 44, Brown's played 46.
Yeah.
I don't really buy it either. I mean, like it hurts at the margins, but you're supposed to have a good enough bench to sustain you through the regular season anyway. That's why you have depth in the regular season, you know. I think part of it, I saw an interesting stat too, since you're a stat guy. I don't know how you feel about the idea of opposing 3-point percentage being a little more random than we'd like to admit, maybe.
Yeah.
And so last year, Boston, their opponents shot a very low percentage against them. It was, let me just find the exact number. They shot 34% opponents, and that was the second lowest in the league. And you might say, oh, that's a great defense. That certainly makes sense. But that's kind of normalized in a way, gone back to mid-pack, and their defense has fallen. Like, how do you stand on that sort of debate about 3-point percentage, random or not?
Yeah, I tend to agree that it's random, but it's also like, I don't think that having a good opposing 3-point percentage was the only reason they were a good defense last year. Because like historically in like the Brad Stevens era, they've always been, or almost always been, a top defense. So like at that point, it's not as much of a random thing as it is more of a like consistent scheme and like having the right talent fit, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I always point out too, like Isaiah Thomas, little Isaiah Thomas, the new one. One of the worst defenders, you know, statistically. But even when he was on the team, Boston had a good defense. So as a team, so clearly scheme wise, they're pretty good. I can't really explain it. I don't buy the injury thing. Maybe it's Tristan Thompson just being older. I don't know. And they're playing him more than Tice. Can't be the Kemba's missed time because he's not a great defender.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's also like all those explanations of like, yeah, if there were more players who could share the offensive load, then Tatum and Brown could contribute more on defense because like they're both very good defenders. But if they're tasked with creating all the offense every night, then they obviously can't contribute as much.
And more Smart missing time certainly hurts more defensively. Robert Williams' advanced stats are kind of off the charts. I mean, offensive blocks plus minus plus 3.6, defense plus 3.5. I mean, by far their best player minute per minute. If you take it for what it's worth, maybe he's been playing against, you know, some scrubs. But do you see him as like a building block kind of player? Maybe not the star of a team, but a guy that you could, you know, lock into the starting lineup for the next 5 years?
Yeah, I definitely see him that way. Like if you watch when he's on the floor, then he like his minutes are always like very electric and stuff. And even though he's not necessarily like a superstar or anything, then you don't necessarily need that, because especially with this team construction, if you just have a big who is great at passing like Williams is, and is just a big good lob threat and can play at least passable defense, which he's better than passable, but that level of defense with strong wing play around him can be really strong.
And that's sort of, before the podcast started, we had this debate about bigs, and we might talk about it with Wiseman. And the argument is like, do you need to draft a defensive minded big guy in the top 5 when guys like Robert Williams he fell. He was kind of a big name, but he fell in the draft. But there's guys like that available usually, sort of like, you know, he's going to make $3 million this year, or $2 million really.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how you like to build the team. So you're sort of like it sounds like you're more optimistic, I guess, on the future, or are you one of these Boston fans that thinks the sky is falling and Ainge needs to get fired?
I guess I'm like reasonably optimistic. Like I think that just this year, especially like the past couple of years in general, have been like weird, where Boston has been trying to be in like both being a young team and also being a contending team. It's like, yeah, we're bringing in Kyrie and Horford and whatever, while also having Tatum and Brown, which like looks really good and works really well if you're then able to keep the like contending talent around. And like, even though Hayward didn't play barely at all in the playoffs, then I think he is really important in terms of like when he was still on the team, then it was still like, oh, we're in a contending phase because we have a max like all-star player who can contribute on offense a lot. And like they technically still do have that with Kemba, but it's not as much where like now they're more into the like, okay, this isn't as much of a contending year as it is like a future year type thing.
So is it sort of, obviously Kyrie left for his own reasons, and Kemba was sort of seen as like the easy plug-in replacement. I think at the time their stats were pretty similar. I think Kemba actually like played more often, so you could argue that he was more valuable at the time. Like, is it as simple as a matter of like Kemba's just not like an all-star right now, and that kind of limits this team's ceiling than what we thought?
Yeah, I think that's a part of it, but that also just like more going back to the Hayward thing, that essentially the best distributor on the team right now is Marcus Smart, who like he's like pretty good, but like he's not like he can't be your like main offensive facilitator, and like that was something that Hayward did really well. Yeah, and Tatum and Brown are still kind of trying to figure that out.
It's and it's funny because it's like it's Hayward. I think obviously now is more appreciated than he was maybe last year or the year before. And I don't think he was playing as well as he was playing for Charlotte earlier in the year for Boston, but it's sort of just like a reliable, good player.
Yeah.
Like it's like a tide that like lifts all boats, right? Like it's like, and you take one guy away, maybe it's the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of depth, at least. But I think, just looking at their depth chart, there's a lot of guys that I like. And I liked Naismith and I liked Romeo coming out of college too. Am I just falling back on like draft hype, or do you think like one of those guys like next year could actually be in the rotation?
I think Langford at least has qualities that would like make him fit in the rotation. It all depends on his health, where like he brings certain things that I think he's missing from like the non-Tatum and Brown players in terms of having someone who can handle to some degree and also kind of drive on their own.
So if you're looking at next year, and I don't want to write them off for this year because I think they could, be a competitive first round series. Like I don't think anyone's like looking forward to playing Boston. But you're looking at Kemba's probably going to be on the team next year. I think Peyton Pritchard's, in terms of guards, he's a solid backup for sure. Marcus Smart is sort of like the wild card, guard wing. And then your wings, you could have Tatum and Brown and Fournier. That's pretty strong. And then you just say that we're going to go relatively small with, and then play Robert Williams at the center. Is there anything you think is like fundamentally lacking with that sort of scenario?
I think aside from just like having like someone who's like actually a good playmaker, then it's like, yeah, that team construction like is really not so different from the past when they went really far. They just had a playmaker in those years. Like even
like what if this team had Mike Conley instead of Kemba? Like, do you think it would be much different?
Yeah, I don't think so. Like maybe a little, but it's still not like Mike Conley is like such like an offensive leader unlike Kemba.
Or it's easy to say like Chris Paul or something, but like that's going to improve every team, really.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be like a Chris Paul type player. Like you could say that a couple of years ago, that type of like facilitator was Al Horford, when he was like the offense really ran through him a lot in terms of the dribble handoffs and a lot of the passes that he would make.
And kind of as a natural transition, because like you might say, like you're saying, it doesn't have to be a point guard. It doesn't even have to be a guard. Somebody like Draymond Green can distribute the ball. And I don't know if there's been any talk about the Warriors trading Draymond Green. I think they should consider it.
Who do you want them to trade them for?
I don't know who the Boston would do, but let's just talk about the Warriors right now, because they, obviously it had some great runs before Durant, obviously. 23 and 27. It just feels like, despite having a top 10 defense, despite having, Steph Curry playing well, if you told me that they would be this far under 500, I would have presumed that Curry missed, 15, 20 games. He's missed about like 10. And Draymond's been pretty healthy. He's played 42 games. It just doesn't seem like I just can't look at this team and think like Klay Thompson's the answer, and then suddenly they're a top 4 team again. What about you?
Yeah, I don't think that they instantly go back to being like a contending team when Clay comes back. But like at the same time, like if they trade Draymond, like I really don't think that's like something that's on the table at all. Because like if they do, who could they realistically get that would make them better?
Yeah, I just think my fear with the Draymond, I've never been as big of a Draymond fan as everybody else, especially my co-host Tyler, like loves him. At one point thought he was more valuable than Steph Curry, to the team at least. I disagree. And you know what? His salary is pretty reasonable. I thought he had like a bloated salary. It's 22 million, 24 million, 25 million, and then 27 million in the last year. That's probably going to be a problem, but he's already 30. I just think I think Draymond Green is like a good player, obviously, and he adds certain qualities, and he would be really great, I think, on a team like the Celtics if he was like the center, like a playmaking small ball center. My fear, it kind of ties back to the big conversation. It's like Draymond Green can't shoot, right? Like at all anymore. Like it's embarrassing, like how bad he's gotten. And then you're going to play Wiseman, your shiny, bright and shiny number 2 pick, heavy minutes, and he's actually an okay shooter, but he's still not good by the standards of an average NBA player. I just don't know if you can get by with that anymore in the NBA of like just like playing. They just don't have enough shooting, as oddly as it sounds. And I think if they just had one of the two and then surrounded them with shooters, I think they'd be better off, personally.
Yeah, I think for the most part that's true, but also situationally when they're also with Curry, then he can make up for like the lack of shooting of
and certainly with certainly Clay too. You bring Clay back, Wiggins is shooting well. Maybe that's enough. And then you could play, Draymond small ball, sometimes 5, sometimes the 4. And I just don't know. I just don't know if they peaked because they're all over 30, the top guys. Right. And Wiseman's just not ready yet. I'm getting pessimistic. And I say Draymond Green because I do think he still has a good amount of trade value based on name recognition. I don't, obviously the Celtics aren't going to trade like Jaylen Brown for him or anything silly like that. I don't know who you could get for him. But, I think a lot of it depends on their draft pick too, because just to refresh everyone's memory, in the Wiggins trade, they have Minnesota's draft pick this year, which is top 3 protected. So Minnesota is currently slotted at number 1, but that really not guaranteed much. It's actually like less than 50-50 chance they'd keep it if they were at number 1. And that changes the game a lot. I mean, at that point, if you're Golden State, let's say you're Bob Myers, you get the 4th pick. What do you do at this point? Like, do you trade your pick and Wiseman and try to go all in with the old core? Do you trade Draymond in the 4th pick and bring in Bradley Beal or something like that? Like, what direction do you think they should go like what Boston was trying to do, like stay good and stay young?
Well, and I think this is like a kind of similar situation to where they were last offseason with the number 2 pick. And at least last offseason, I was a big proponent of like if this was on the table, then it's like a slightly different thing. But like I think DeMar DeRozan is like super underrated, and he could like fit there so well as like having a secondary facilitator and just filling in a lot of holes there. So last offseason, at least, I would have been a big fan if they had traded Wiggins and the pick for DeRozan, or like just I don't know, maybe you would think that's an overpay for DeRozan, so maybe.
Well, it depends on the pick too, because it's like the 2 pick last year was LaMelo's like blown up. I don't think anyone thought the 2 pick was super valuable last year. I think they could have gotten DeRozan. I don't know who else they could have gotten, but I like your point about DeRozan because he has become underrated. He's averaging like 7 assists a game or something like that. People don't realize that. And I think he would fit. Like maybe their hope is like Wiggins is going to be that kind of guy. And he certainly improved defensively, averaging 18 a game now, steal and a block a game. Oubre is the guy that I would maybe float if you can. He's a free agent, so I guess you can't. But maybe there's some sort of sign and trade with Oubre. I just never liked Oubre either.
Yeah, same.
Tyler likes him again. See, Tyler, that's why we need you on the podcast instead of Tyler. He likes all the guys we don't like.
Yeah, so it's like in the offseason, it's like a difficult position for them because, like, obviously Curry is still amazing, and like you're not going to get realistically a rookie with a pick that can like immediately contribute at a championship level. Whereas if there is some type of DeRozan type trade out there, then even though it's like in attacking, it might not be the best move, then it's like, okay, it doesn't matter if we think we can contend, and it's like Curry's last, however, like who knows how many years he has left of being like a superstar player.
Yeah, those are great points because everyone wanted to compare last year to the Spurs getting Tim Duncan when they had that high pick. Like, oh my God, the rich get richer. And the point being, like, Tim Duncan was a college senior. He was incredibly ready to play and contribute. And he was immediately like a top 10 player in the NBA as a rookie. I think he averaged like 22 and 12 or something.
Right.
And any guy now, like the 19-year-olds are just not going to be ready for a couple of years. And so Weissman was not quite ready. And I don't think whoever they get next year is going to be ready. And so I guess that's my fear that was plaguing the back of my mind is not so much like, hey, Clay comes back, we're a top 6 seed. It's not the end of the world. My fear is Curry is 32. He's going to be on the last year of his deal next year. And maybe he'll just resign out of loyalty. But in terms of winning more rings, if he cares, can you really argue that Golden State's the place to do it?
Yeah, I mean, that seems like it would be a difficult argument for him to be like looking at I don't know exactly what teams are going to have cap space then, but it's hard to believe that at that time, looking at Golden State's roster construction, that they would be like the best option for him in terms of winning. But I think he will resign there.
I think he will too, but maybe I'm just like paranoia. Is like I live in LA, so there was a lot of chatter about like LeBron's recruiting Curry, and I'm like, okay, that sounds ridiculous. The cap doesn't make sense. At least if he wants to get 40 million or whatever.
Right.
At the same time, if you could play with LeBron James and Anthony Davis, I think that's kind of a pretty good fit, especially if you do think Draymond and Klay Thompson are just never going to be back at like an all-star level.
Right.
Or just go to Brooklyn. Should everyone just go to Brooklyn?
Yeah, and just request a buyout.
And yeah, just everyone just goes. I don't know. I hope it works out because I do love the team. I love, just like felt like such an organic team, and now it's just like the ugly side of being over 30 and
yeah.
And you might not get the pick anyway, so like there goes that asset theoretically.
I mean, if they don't get the pick, then it's Minnie's pick next year, though. So like, they still have the asset.
But Minnesota should be much better next year. I don't know why Minnesota's so bad. I mean, like always baffles me. Like even if you have a crappy team or organization, it's like there's enough talent, and forget the injuries. I think it's overblown too. I mean, Minnesota's like a sleeping giant, I think, if they keep their pick in the top couple picks.
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't buy it? I
think sorry, keep going.
No, that's the thing. I like the coach. I kind of like Anthony Edwards coming on. I love Cat. If they could add like Cade Cunningham or something, I know you're not a big college basketball guy, but eventually, if you haven't add enough number 1 picks, you're going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, that's like obviously true if like the picks are really good. But I think a lot of the thing with the Timberwolves, which was actually, I think, maybe something we talked about in the past, where like looking at the Suns in the past, like a really great example of like, yeah, you can like make high picks and add talent, but then like you can't be like a team where like all of your players are like just random picks from this past year, because then like realistically, like 3 or 4 of them are going to be good, and then the rest of the team, like the Suns in the past, the rest of their team wasn't like even like NBA quality players, and then like this year and over the past couple of years, they've been making that transition of like adding like Jay Crowder type players. I mean, obviously Chris Paul was a big part of that, but just having NBA level players who can contribute immediately to like go in with those guys, and like the Timberwolves don't exactly have that type of depth and like. I guess like not necessarily
or like maturity too,
presence, but still,
it's like the blind leading the blind, and like if I had to pick like a personality to lead my team, I don't know if it'd be Cat and D'Angelo Russell. But that's true, and I actually think that like Phoenix is like a great example of what they want to be, because they just turned it on. Like now they're in the second spot and they're just really good. And it only took like, a few years and Chris Paul. And I could see that for Minnesota, but they don't have that Chris Paul type. They probably do need. And the sad thing is they're supposed to be Jimmy Butler, right? I mean, like that was sort of the plan. It's like he'll be our veteran leader to teach the kids how to win. And it's just kind of combusted.
Yeah.
Maybe they can get him back. I don't know. I am interested, but I know you haven't done a deep dive in college basketball yet in the prospects, but like I was curious, I was interested to hear that you don't really love college basketball despite being in college. Is there a reason? Is it like a stylistic thing, or you just like why is that?
I don't know. I mean, just like, I don't think it's so stylistic because like you could say like, I guess the style is pretty similar with the exception of like, like college teams play a lot more zone, but it's just like in general, I feel like the level of offense is like so much lower in college where it's like, I don't know, like the UCLA Michigan game, I was watching it and it's like, okay, in a 40-minute game, you're scoring 100 total points among both teams. And like the last minute, it was just like air ball three after air ball three. And it was like, it's like, like a lot of people are like, oh, like I like watching college because they actually try on defense on like the NBA. But like, I think that's not true at all. It's just the NBA offensive players are so much better than they are in college that like defensive skill actually matters. And that it's not just effort.
Absolutely. I mean, that's like you're talking to I have an old man tendency sometimes, but anyone who talks about like they can't play defense now, it's just like, it doesn't watch. Like they're trying their best. It's just really hard when guys are now shooting like 50% from three. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
College can get ugly at times. And there was not even Ivy League play this year. I know you guys canceled the whole thing. Did you like that decision or no? You don't really care.
I don't know. I didn't follow anything.
I think you can get out there. I want you to take over. You can take over as coach, right? I don't know Yale's situation right now. Harvard still has a good team, right?
I have no clue.
No clue. You could do it. I always thought that like kids should do that, especially if they're like, I know there's no like athletic scholarships in the same way, but if I was like a fringe prospect and I'm ranked like 120th and I'm not going to make the NBA, but I'm a coveted college prospect, like I would totally go to Yale or Harvard or something like that. Just like use that.
Yeah. And
then, the educational value is probably a lot better than if I went to like, no offense to like Texas Tech or something like that, like eventually you're going to have to do something other than basketball.
Yeah, definitely.
But that's why we want to keep you in basketball. And so what's it been like? So let's just wrap it up on your sort of lifestyle. Like, so is it going to go back to normal in the fall? Are you guys planning to like be on campus all the time?
I don't know. I mean, there was an email sent out a little while ago, like vague fall plans. It's like, yeah, we like hope and think that things will be decently normal and in person, and that it's probable that at least for the start, things will still be virtual as like we're figuring things out. But I don't know. So like it'll start getting there.
They, I don't know if you saw that they allowed athletes to have an extra year of athletic eligibility if they wanted to because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And would they allow that for college kids if you just wanted to just hang around and feel like you got the missed year that COVID took away from you? Just like socially too. I mean, just like go like have fun and like meet people.
I mean, like people who like wanted an extra year could just like take a gap year, which
Did a lot of people do that or not? It makes sense actually.
Yeah, a decent number. Like I would have wanted to too, but I ended up not doing it. A decent number of people did.
Yeah, I think gap year would be great. I mean, it's obviously not, it's like, what do you do in the meantime? It's hard to like financially figure that out. Right. But if you could, I think it would be a great scenario. I almost like talk about my missed opportunities. I used to be, not you, I wasn't tall, but I used to be ahead of the curve for baseball stats. And I would write about it a little bit. Internet was just starting really. And like I wrote a letter to the White Sox because they were my favorite team about Frank Thomas, who was my favorite player. And they're like, somebody in the front office is like, well, if you want to take a gap year, this could have been you, like you want to take a gap year and like work for the team as like an intern. You know, they weren't offering me a covered job. And then for a year in college, and then you go to college the year after. And I didn't do it because I was like so eager to start college. But in hindsight, I'm like, that would have been really cool. And I probably would have made me a, more mature person. And maybe I would have pursued baseball and front office or something like that more seriously.
Yeah, you never know.
But have you ever been like because Tyler like talks you up to like NBA teams. If they offered you not like, let's say a gap year, like let's say, Boston's like, come even intern for us. I know, for a year and then go back to school. Would you consider that, or you just want to like ride out to college?
I mean, like it would obviously depend on like the situation a little bit, but I think I would generally be for it. But that my parents would not be for it. So this is just like the whole like gap year thing this year. I had things that I think I wanted to, but like my parents, obviously it's like for very good reasons, like don't want me to. So like I didn't end up doing it. So it's like the same type of thing of like, yeah, just like imagine telling my parents like, yeah, what do you guys think about me taking a year off to do basketball analytics? It's just like a funny thought.
You never know. I mean, like it sounds like if you're from like a academically minded like family, it sounds like silly, but having a very specific interest can be a good thing. Like I might have said this story, but there's a kid in my high school who loved Hot Wheels cars, and through high school, he was like 16 and still loved Hot Wheels. And like, what a silly thing, right? And now he's like working for Mattel and like running Hot Wheels. I'm like there was probably, yeah, it's probably like the one guy who like wanted to do that, and it really set him out from the pack. And obviously, basketball, everyone likes basketball, and everyone would do basketball stuff if they could. But I think having a specific specialization is not a terrible thing.
Yeah, definitely.
But we'll see the future. That's why we want to check in with you every, few months, every year to see where it takes you. I'm glad that you haven't like totally like become like a DJ or something like that, using analytics to find the best like beats or something.
I mean, it's actually not far off.
That's probably true, right?
I mean, like one of the things I've been doing for the past couple months is doing this like audio research type thing, where it's like machine learning things for like manipulating audio in certain ways. So,
no. Yeah. It terrifies me because I do like creative writing as well. And I'm like, I'm just waiting for the day because I'm like, machines can never do that. I'm like, maybe in 5 years they could do that. It's a little scary, but you just have to be in control. Yeah. We just need you operating the machines. All right, awesome. And well, I like that, talking about those two teams because I think they are really not in a similar boat. I think Boston's in a better position right now, at least for this year. And they're still on like the upside. There's still like some upside left to be wrung out, whereas like Golden State's really trying to figure it out. Do you think, just to put a button on it, like, do you think Golden State needs like a shakeup in terms of like Boston? You like Danny Ainge. I'm guessing you still like Brad Stevens. Like, do you think Golden State like needs to drastically rethink their approach, or is it just sort of ride it out, see what you can make with these draft picks?
I don't know. I mean, I think in general, I would like, if I was like their front office, then I would try to like, yeah, sure, you can say like it's selling low on Wiseman or whatever, but I highly doubt he'll be like a championship level contributor during when Curry is still a superstar. So like maybe try to shake that up.
Yeah, and if you have a pick and Wiseman, then it's a rebuilding situation. Some team out there will be interested in that, some young team. Right. Can I end on one question? I always want to ask Boston fans this. I want to see if the tide has turned. Jason Tatum versus Jaylen Brown. Like, let's say you had to lose one for some weird, NBA rule, real allocate jam talent expansion. You still ride with Tatum, or do you think Brown's a little better? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, Tatum's better.
Tatum's better still. Because I've seen some people to argue the Jaylen Brown case. He's a little older. And he's having a good year. I don't know if it's sustainable.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, like Brown had an amazing start to the year, and he's like cooled off of it, and he's still having an amazing year. But like even with that, Tatum is still better this year, at least.
So you're still committed to Ainge, Stevens, and Tatum.
Yeah.
still committed to the Celtics. You're wavering on basketball. It's a good time to jump on a podcast, basketball podcast. I mean, hopefully we didn't turn you off completely. Now you're just like, I'm totally done with it. This is the last straw. No, but thanks for coming on and filling in for Tyler and actually providing some insight. Tyler, we're just talking about how great Romeo Langford was supposed to be as a rookie. And it never came true yet, but maybe someday. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Sal. Enjoy the rest of whatever they call this year, college year, whatever, sophomore year. Are you sophomore year?
Yeah.
Ride it out. It'll be better next year. You can go hog wild next year.
I hope so.
Big junior year coming for Tal. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with Tyler. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Underdog Sports NBA Show with your hosts, Tyler Laurie and Zandrick Ellison. Tune in next week for more NBA storylines and news.